Okay, so we have to ask, why West Chicago? Why is this community something that's special? Um, what's the attraction for me, and what's the thinking behind making this become kind of a hub for production? And what I need to probably first of all offer is a little bit of history. First of all, you have two rivers. You have the Fox River, which along that river you had your first settlement, which was Batavia, and then from north to south you have Elgin, St. Charles, Geneva, Batavia, and Aurora that develop along the Fox River. Then on the other side you have the DuPage River, and your first settlement there was Glen Ellen. That was 1834. Batavia was 1830. So along that side you have Wheaton, let's say West Chicago, Bartlett, Wheaton, West Chicago, Glen Ellen, and Naperville. Well, West Chicago was positioned in 1849 as really a military city. So what it was in the Indian Relocation Act in 1830, it was a railroad town that was created to bring settlement into the area and distribute it from a high point. West Chicago is the highest point in the area. That's why it also has the airport. So that was the choice for the railroad to be positioned for the distribution of people to acquire the land from the Indian Relocation Act, which was established in 1830. That was essentially to take the unsuspecting Indians and move them off of the coveted farmland that then was distributed to essentially, mostly New Englanders and Northern European immigrants. So that became the primary incentive around the development of the railroad and then subsequently the other communities around. Well, that made West Chicago a distribution point. And what happened is that people came from the world, came across the railroad, came down the Great Lakes, and then positioned in West Chicago and then out to either Wisconsin or points west. Why is that significant? Well, because it establishes that West Chicago was created for distribution. And today, when we think about how ideas are distributed, your infrastructures, the reality of the ways that you live and how it is that you travel is much, much, much more significant than people realize. All right, your day-to-day activity inside of a local community is basically the way that your ideas are going to be supported. Now, most churches operate with a 20-mile radius rule. In other words, they're going to put a church in position to operate within inside of a 20-mile radius because that's where people can travel to. So that's the logic in churches. You figure the same kind of logic in a little reverse manner comes from West Chicago. It was the distribution point for this whole area in the major land campaign of world history. And the reason why this area was so coveted is because you had this farmland that then could be brought into the Great Lakes and distributed by river out to the Atlantic Ocean, down the Mississippi on the other side, and then by railroad across to the east and into the west, the north, and south. So its transportation routes from this point was huge. And West Chicago then now, because it has a north-south and an east-west railroad line, basically when traffic comes downtown, those lines give them a double potential to actually be stopped by train traffic, which of course at one point was a huge advantage and why the city was called Junction. Well, the other piece that then creates is essentially a loitering community, meaning that you have now the historic downtown that is protected because of being the first railroad town in the state of Illinois and the first junction west of the Great Lakes. But then also, too, what you have is that you have a de-incentive to come to downtown West Chicago unless you really mean to do so. That is ideal for the development of creative and intellectual capital, which incidentally is done by diversity and movement. You need movement and you need diversity to be able to create creative ideas and intellectual capital. So that alone, because of West Chicago's geographic and historic purpose, makes it become an ideal platform for the development of creative production. The second piece is that West Chicago is the most diverse community in the area. And as a result, you have every ethnic group you could possibly want represented inside the city. So what that offers is it offers a way for the community, by virtue of what it is, to be able to not just have the ability to stimulate better creative thought, but also to become a platform into those relationships that extend out into the world. And in a global market, that is a entirely significant advantage for a community to have. In other words, the ethnically singular community, the white communities, are going to find themselves in a significant disadvantage in the up-and-coming economy because they won't have the network into the world that will then make them become a global, viable economy. Reference point, the book The World is Flat, published in 2005, identifies outsourcing, the use of your global human markets, technology, and then local value as being your key platforms for the future economy. I personally agree with that, and that's why I see West Chicago as being extremely significant for this area as far as a location goes. But back to diversity, you have a community that also, because of its history, and the history of West Chicago really relates to Chicago and to the cow knocking over the bucket and burning down the city. Because while it was positioned to be a distribution point for a settlement campaign, what happened was that the settlement then was drawn into the city in 1871 after the cow started the fire, and the city needed to be rebuilt. So a lot of your immigration support went into the city to rebuild it. The second thing that happened was then the locomotive was created, which rendered the roundhouse, which was positioned in West Chicago, that would be a station that would turn the only forward-moving steam engines around and send them into a different direction. It rendered the roundhouse obsolete because your locomotives can move back and forth. Therefore, what happened with the railroad is that the plan to make West Chicago or Junction a hub of distribution was changed and then moved into the city. To try to reclaim that influence, the early founders decided to rename the city of Junction, or the Junction, or as it was known, Turner's Junction, into West Chicago to create the appearance that it was just a little ways away from Chicago. Well, what that drew was it drew industrial traffic, and your food industry, like General Mills, decided to position themselves here, or your growing industries. There was a flour company that once bought the DuPage Airport to distribute flowers all over the world. That was in West Chicago. And so you had these major agricultural, industrial companies that then looked at West Chicago as a key point. Well, it also then created a industrial community over the course of time. And when you think about film development and when you think about creative capital, you need to have people that know how to recreate a whole world. And so, like John Hughes in the 1990s when he produced the film Reach the Rock concluded, is that West Chicago is an ideal place because of its distribution spot, because of its control of its historic downtown, and it's not going to change, because it's a loitering spot that then facilitates creative development, because of its diverse community, which creates intellectual capital, because of its different language by being bilingual, which creates the ability to get outside of your world and into somebody else's, because of all these things, and then because of the industrial capacity underneath it, you have a community that was ideal for the development of film production in a support capacity. Not necessarily in a presentation, but in a support capacity. Communities like Naperville or Geneva or even St. Charles or Wheaton might be other places that would be good for the communication or the platform end of it. But West Chicago is ideal for the production and the support of the production because of all these different elements. Now, on top of that, it has a number of different assets that are in the town that actually can be transitioned to support creative arts. And so going back to this idea advanced by John Adams, I study war so that my children can study farming, so that their children can study the arts. I propose to you that West Chicago is the arts ideal platform for the future because of all these dynamics converging together in this junction that allows for the distribution of creative, innovative, intellectual capital because of its diversity, and that creative capital can actually be supported by independent creative ideas in a much more efficient manner because you have a industrial-based community that can support the recreation of whole worlds. So what I want to do is, this video is really for the arts community to understand why West Chicago is significant. On Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock, we invite the music world to come and to basically connect at Mid-City. That's kind of like our door, maybe our entry in. But what we see is a whole production community being developed. And so I want to invite you, whether you're from Chicago, whether you're from one of the surrounding towns or villages, or whether you're just locally interested, to come to West Chicago on Wednesday nights and to become part of transforming. And again, the city's motto is where history and progress meets, transforming the economy into the next platform, which is a creative, velocity, intellectual capital economy that is going to basically be what the rest of the world follows. So I want to invite you to come and join us and to be a part of helping to create that intellectual and creative community.